All right, folks, we're going to get started. I love how I can quiet a room just by talking. How's everyone doing today?
Yeah, you come to my meeting one-on-one and do that.
You may come today? I have a good voice for that. I
Yeah.
can rattle walls a little bit. Thank you all for coming. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Chris Hackler. I'm Director of University Teaching and Learning here at Quinnipiac. We're very fortunate today to have Dr. Todd Zakrajsek. I always say his name wrong. Here to talk, and I wrote notes because Todd has switched around a little bit. Todd actually comes out of psychology. He was an associate professor at Southern Oregon for several years, where he started a small faculty development center. And he got the faculty development center up and running and rolling, and then he moved to Central Michigan, where he was a full-time director of a faculty development center. And then from there went on to UNC, where he was executive director for the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill Faculty Development Center for several years, and recently moved to be the faculty development person in the medical school at UNC. Todd gives talks all over the country. He's gone international. He's got a book he's going to talk about, and he's one of these speakers where you go and you walk away feeling like you've learned something you can actually apply right now. It's not so theoretical, but there's real application there. So we're very fortunate to have Todd here today. I'd like to everyone welcome.
That was so funny because we've known each other for years, and I just realized as you were introducing me that I do this too.
I do.
You do that a lot. But my kids caught me, they came to one of my presentations. I have kids that are like 26 and 20 and 18, and they said that looks evil. You have to stop that. So let's get started. So yeah, the quick thing, let me just run through a couple of quick things. I like to do this because to get a sense, if we're going to do this for a couple hours, of kind of who I am. I want to do that because I'll say a lot of things and I don't want to be misinterpreted any more than necessary. So just a quick rundown. First generation college student, so when I went off to college, I love to tell people I went off to college, and I remember my mom saying, I don't know if anyone in our family is smart enough to make it at college, but if anybody can do it, Todd can, so no pressure there. And so I went off to college, small school, Lake Superior State in northern Michigan, and I didn't need an advisor, quite frankly, and I'm telling you this because this is the attitude of a first generation college student that did really, really well in high school. I didn't need any help. I didn't need an advisor. I didn't need those people, so I could do it myself. I looked through the book. It wasn't that hard to figure out. I had to take a math course, so I signed up for calculus. I had to have a science course, so I took physics. I had to have a lab course, and I didn't think they'd let me double dip on the science course, so I took chemistry just to be sure. And then I needed a social science course, so I took intro to psychology, which looked like it was going to be fun. And then, of course, I had to have my major course, so I took introduction to criminal justice, because I was going to be a cop. So in my Introduction to Criminal Justice program, I didn't see a lot of my colleagues in the chemistry and physics and calculus courses. But, you know, I started off. My very first grade I got was my chemistry grade. I remember that one. It was an F minus minus. So I went to my instructor. First time I'd ever been in a faculty member's office. I was scared to death, and I thought, okay, I got to talk to this guy. So, excuse me, sir, I got an F minus minus, and I'm not exactly sure what this means. And I still remember this, not exact words, but pretty much that came across as the, given you received an F minus minus, it doesn't surprise me you fail to comprehend it. And I thought at that moment, I'm not going to treat students like that. That's not what I'm going to do. And so from that day forward, and I'm going to come back to that in just a minute, I treat students very differently, I believe, because I'm always trying to think of what is it they're trying to achieve. And if I can focus on what are they trying to achieve, it changes how I interact with them. So on this quick little side note, if a student says to me, in fact, I remember students doing this, students all the time, they'll say, hey, Dr. Z, I missed class on Monday. Did I miss anything? You know, the dreaded, did I miss anything? The very first thought that comes to your brain are things like, why, of course you didn't miss anything. When you were not absent, or when you were absent, we realized we couldn't possibly learn without you, so we put our heads on the desk and we mourned your loss or your absence, and that kind of stuff. But what I typically do now, because of that F minus minus thing, is I stop and I think, what is it the student's really trying to get across in our exchange? So now what I do is I stop the student and I'll say, you know, when you say, did I miss anything, it feels to me like you're saying something like, did you happen to do anything important on that particular day? Because you don't normally do. You don't normally do anything. Did you happen to do anything important on that day? That's how it kind of feels. And the students invariably, if you stop them, will say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. I'll say, what did you mean? And the last time I did this, a student said, I guess not the last time, one of the early times, a student said, okay, Was there anything in particular that happened on Monday that I should pay specific attention to be ready for class on Wednesday? I said, that's a good question. If students ask me, is it going to be on the test? I used to think, how rude is that? And now I drop back, and what I'm really thinking is grades are important to students, whether we like it or not, they're important to students, and they would like to know if I work hard, what do I do, how do I maximize my return in a sense of so that I get recognition for all the work I'm doing. So I try to think that back through, because that's all the way back to the F stuff. So I did graduate from college, married my wife, who it's usually with your wife, it's best to marry. Kind of a weird statement there, I guess, now that I said it out loud that way. But we got married when we were undergraduates, which was kind of weird. She was a first-generation college student, bounced around a little bit while she was getting her degree. And the end result, Chris told you, I went to Southern Oregon, psych department, got tenured, got promoted, rescinded tenure, moved to Michigan so I could be around my family. Was there for 7 years, built a center which was doing really, really, really well. And then a friend of mine from North Carolina called me, back to the first-generation college concept, have imposter syndrome. I've had it my whole career. It's the concept that sooner or later people are going to figure out I don't know what I'm doing, but until then I'm having fun. It's rampant in higher education, by the way, amongst your colleagues, amongst administrators, and amongst students. So sometimes when they're acting pissy, they're just scared. So you got to stop and think about some of those things. It really changes it. And by the way, I'm an industrial psychologist, not clinical or counseling. So kind of weird, I think like those people sometimes. Applied for a job at North Carolina. This is the end of the story. Except the funny part was, I applied for the job just kind of seeing if it would happen because a friend of mine was there and said, you've got to apply for this job. They called me and offered me the position. I still remember it. Turned to my wife and I said, honey, they just offered me the position of faculty development director at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill with 3,000 faculty members. It kind of blew my mind there. She said, only in America could you get a job teaching teachers how to teach at a school you could never have gotten into. So she really is right there for me the whole time. So that's the kind of the 4.5 minute version of kind of where I am today. So what I've been doing along the way is teaching classes. I haven't taught full time in the classroom, like the full teaching load, for about 10 years now, but I still teach periodically, and I've been collecting tons of stuff. And the idea now is what I'm trying to share with people, my own campus and other places, are what are some things we can think about in the classroom. So some of the stuff we'll share, you'll learn from your colleagues, hopefully you'll get a few from me, and we'll just see where it's going. All right, so, first things first, by the way, before I even get started, best thing if you're ever using PowerPoint is the B button. See, I want to make sure Chris pointed this out too. Lots of hands-on kinds of things. If you put something up there that's kind of in-depth, like, and you'll see me do it a couple times here today, a graph or a lot of text or something to try to get a point across, all you do is you click the B button and the attention shifts from up there back to me. Otherwise, the entire time I'm talking about whatever is up there, you're reading what's up there, and then by about the time you finish reading that, I've got done explaining what's up there, so now you've read it, but you don't know why I even put it up there. So the B button works really, really well. Of course, if you don't like the black, you can go to white too, and all you have to do to get rid of it is click any button that's on there. Okay. Chris mentioned this little book that I wrote, and I'm encouraging you not to buy it because I hate selling anything. So I just gave Chris a whole bunch of copies, and so if you are interested at all, check with him, and I'm sure that there's some opportunity you could check them out, or we'll figure something out. Terry Doyle and I wrote this because we were tired of a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in education, and one of them is, and I'm not here, again, seriously, not here to sell anything, but the framework for this is that this thing right here. I spend a big chunk of my time right now looking at the learning process and the teaching process and what can we do to help facilitate the learning of students that's over and above the actual teaching tips I could do. Think, pair, share. Write, pair, share. How many of you have heard of a think, pair, share? Raise your hand real quick. See, almost everybody in here. This is great. For those of you, how many have not? Raise your hand. Okay. So about a third of you haven't, 2/3 of you have. For the third that haven't, all it boils down to, and it's a fabulous teaching technique, not a tip, it's a technique there. You have people think for about 30 seconds to a minute. You can either write or think, depending on whether you're doing a write, pair, share or think, pair, share. But you think to yourself for about 30 seconds to a minute, then you pair up with one other person, you talk about it for about a minute, maybe 2 minutes, and then you share with the whole group. So it's thinking, then pairing, and then sharing. If I teach you how to do a think, pair, share, and you go into the classroom and do it with your students, it's a great way to get your students more involved in the class. You could also do a fishbowl technique. You could do a muddiest point. You could do a billion other cats that are out there. You could do some brainstorming techniques. There's a lot of good techniques out there. The issue is that if the students aren't feeling like they can learn or they don't understand how learning works, all those techniques are great, but you still have a foundation that's not there yet. So the stuff we'll play around with today are actual things you can do to help set up that foundation. Actually, I'm going to start with a think, pair, share. How crazy is that? So I'm going to have you actually do this. Think for just a second of something that you're really, really good at. Here's what I'm going for on this. I couldn't figure out how to actually word this, and I promise you this will take no more than 3 minutes. I'm not a big fan of putting you into groups and having you do stuff while I go and do my email. So the concept here is just a couple of minutes. But think of something that you're really good at. I used to be a bicyclist, and I actually biked across country once, so I figured I was a really good bicyclist. My wife's a phenomenal gardener. What is something you're good at? So 30 seconds. Think about that thing you're really good at, but don't talk to anybody yet. All right, now, one other person. So just pair it with one other person. If you have 2, 3, that's okay. But we're going to take about a minute or so. So relatively quickly, both of you, talk about what it is that you do really, really well. What thing is this? All right, let's see what you came up with.
I like to cook. And I like to do.
All right, so first things first. Anybody here one that they thought was kind of a cool thing that somebody else is doing? So what's something you just heard that you thought, wow, that's a really neat thing that they're doing? So what's... Yes.
Nick shared with us, Nick's a student here.
Yep.
And he shared with us that when he gets stressed, he writes. So
Writer,
that's
okay.
kind of his
So
outlet.
you write.
My outlet.
Good, writing. Good, so you're a writer. This is good. Writers write. Very good. Others? A couple other quick things.
Gardening.
Gardening?
Excellent. A couple people.
Baking. Baking. I love people who bake. Another baker. So here's a couple of different bakers. That's good.
Cooking as well.
Cooking, another cook. All right, this is good. Yes.
Listening to classical music.
Classical music. Excellent. Very good.
Photography.
Ooh, that's a very good one too. Photography's good.
Building tube stereos. Kevin does that.
Oh, building tube stereos. That is fabulous. All right. So I'm going to keep moving on here, but there's a lot of things that you guys are doing. So I like to do this. So there's some really good research out there, by the way. This says icebreakers. You have to be careful with icebreakers because icebreakers have nothing to do with the content of the course or whatever you're doing. They're oftentimes just seen as a waste of time. So you have to be really careful with icebreakers. So I want to give you an icebreaker that I just actually found this by accident just recently. I had done it. And I mentioned to a group, and somebody afterwards did a quick tweet and said it was the best icebreaker they'd ever heard. So I thought I should do this in faculty development stuff too. Students often believe, and we'll talk a little bit later about fixed mindsets, but students often believe you're either good at something, you're not. Okay, so mathematics, for instance. Oh, I'm not good at math. You've heard that phrase a lot, right? Oh, I can't give presentations. I'm terrible at presentations. Oh yeah, I can't do science stuff. I don't like science stuff. I'm not good at it. You know, I'm not that great at writing. I'm not a good writer. They'll talk about these things they're not good at in academia, and one of the biggest problems we've got as an underlining issue is as soon as you decide you're not good at something, basically what you're saying is I refuse to put the cognitive energy into this thing because I've already decided that it's a waste of energy. There's no reason for me to put any energy into math because I'm bad at math. I taught statistics for 20 years. First class I ever taught, 1985. I love teaching statistics. I was in a grocery store one day and I bought a bottle of pop. I'm from Michigan, so I bought a bottle of pop. I bought a bottle of pop and a candy bar. The young lady, it was when scanners first came out. That's how old I am. And she went beep, beep, looked right at me. She said, I can't remember the exact number, but she said something like this, $17.30. I said, it can't be $17.30. And she said, yeah. And I said, no, it can't be. It was the express aisle, but nobody's behind me, because even a teachable moment shouldn't hold up an express aisle. But I said no, and when I said no, I realized I'm always a teacher, I was looking at the two items, and she was looking at the cash register. So I said, stop looking at the cash register, look right there. And she looked, and I said, that can't cost $17. And she looked at me, she says, I'm no good at math. And the concept I'm no good at math means I'm not putting any energy into this. And I said, well, you wouldn't have to be great at math. I said, how much do you think that bottle of pop costs? Remember when this scanners first came out a long time ago? She said, I don't know, maybe like 75 cents or $1. I said, let's go with $1. How much about the candy bar? She said, maybe 50 cents. I said, that sounds good. Add together $1 and 50 cents. How much do you get? She says, $1.50. I said, you are good at math. Now, look at the register. Woo, that is high. She's learning math. But the moment, I still found this so incredible. When she said, I can't do math, I don't do math, she wasn't going to put any energy into it all. I can't give a presentation. I told a student one time, because I always require presentations, I said, in my class, I have a special provision. If you seriously cannot do a presentation, I will waive all the presentation requirements from the course. She said, serious, that'd be so cool, Dr. Z. And I said, yep, no problem. Tell you what, I have an office hour on Thursday. You come by. I'm really, really busy, so I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to set a clock. You have 2 minutes on the nose to explain to me why you cannot give a presentation. See, you're laughing so much already. And I will waive it. And she showed up with the best persuasive argument I probably have ever heard. At the end of the 2 minutes, I said, that was amazing. She said, thank you. I said, no, it was really amazing. She said, thank you. I said, just do that for the first speech. She said, I thought you were going to waive it. I said, that's if you couldn't do one. You just did one that was amazing. And I remember she said something like, thank you, Dr. Z, I appreciate that. Didn't actually come out like that. I was a sneaky little something, and I can't remember what now. But she did fine. But the point was, she wouldn't put any energy into it. And by the way, the last one I will say is, I was told I was not a writer, by me mostly. Because the first paper I remember turning in high school, I got a C on it. Then I turned in another one, I worked really, really hard and got a C on it. Then I worked really hard for a third one to prove I could do it and got a C on that one. And then I realized I was a C-level writer, that's what I was. And from that point forward, all the way through high school and most of the way through college, actually almost all the way through college, I wrote C papers. And it's what I did. I was really good at writing a C paper. And when I had instructors say, you know, you can write better than this, I say, no, I can't. That's what I do. I do C papers. And it wasn't until I was a professor, actually teacher, and for McGraw-Hill asked me to write a little module, and I said, I can write you one, but you're going to need to edit the crap out of it because I'm like a C-level writer. And they sent back this note that said it was the cleanest thing they had ever seen at McGraw-Hill for this person who had been working there 4 or 5 years. It changed my thought. So I'm telling you this because our job is to change the students from being C writers and can't do math, can't do presentations, to other things. This is one way of doing it. You do the icebreaker where you say, what is it that you do really, really well? And then the next thing I come back with is, how'd you get there? Did you suddenly wake up one day, go into the kitchen, and start baking, and out comes this wonderful product? Or photography, did you just pick up a camera and say, shoot, shoot, shoot? Whoa, those could go in a magazine. No, you spend hundreds and hundreds of hours working at everything that you just talked about. You see, nobody is born being able to do what they do. You work at it. I'm not saying that you're going to, and if you're in my class, I'm not telling you that you're all going to be superstar quantitative analysts. I'm not telling you that you will all be world-class presenters. And I'm not telling you that you will be like prize-winning authors. But what I can tell you is you all can get really good at it. You may not be phenomenal, you may not be experts, but you can get really good. But it can't be from repetition. Dan Willingham wrote a really great book I like, Why Students Don't Like School, and he mentions this in there. He's, you know, I've been, and I'll take this right now for my own example, I'm not my own example, his example, but I've been driving since I was 16 years old. For the first couple years I was driving, I got way better. I increased significantly. Anybody have children that are just about driving age, just almost driving age? Pay up your insurance policies, get a motorcycle helmet, and just, good luck. 3 daughters, they all made it through, but wow, what a ride. So the first couple of years, you're learning a lot, but after you learn a lot, think about, for your own driving, how much better are you at driving than you were 5 years ago? And the point here is, if you do the same thing every day you do the exact same thing, you don't get better at it. If you want to be better at driving, you have to work at it. Nobody would go up to a NASCAR driver and assume that those individuals just started driving like that. If you're going to drive 175 miles an hour through a banked corner with a car a foot on either side of you while somebody's bumping you in the back, and you watch some of those. I've watched 3 of my daughters be born, but you want to see a real miracle? I'm living in North Carolina, so I have to watch NASCAR. It's required. The kids were pretty cool watching them being born. But 175 miles an hour in a corner, when a car starts to fishtail and they drive out of it, how do you drive out of a fishtail at 175 miles an hour? That's just amazing. But they work at it all the time. Couple of bakers, not bakers, bakers or chefs? I mean, do you bake? This very different. Okay, so there's very different. I've been baking cakes for a long time. They always look like this. You know what's weird? I've never just finished baking and had it just look like that. I would have to work at this. And I think, although I may or may not be able to do this, I think I could get close, but I couldn't do it without looking how to get better and then getting better. So I think the most important thing we can actually share with our students is how do you get better at things? What are you working at? I was really blessed just recently. It was funny. I went to K-State and I got to have breakfast with Bill Snyder. So Bill Snyder's I think he's 75 years old, just signed a $12 million extension on his contract. He retired from Kansas State. It was the losingest football program in the history of the NCAA when he showed up. After he won his first game, someone called him and said, "Get out now, you're on a winning streak." But turned K-State into this powerhouse thing. He retired, they named the stadium after him, and then they hired him back. So he's actually a coach in a stadium that's named after him, which is kind of a bizarre thing. But one of the things that he did, which was really neat, is I said, what do you do with a team where you're just losing all the time? He said, number one is you forget about the overall thing that you're after. He said, you don't worry about winning. He said, you worry about getting better at something. Because you worry about winning when you're really good. You worry about getting better to get really good. And he said what he would do is he would walk around to all of his players, think of them as students, say, what is it that between now and next week you're going to work on? And for one of the players, it may be, I'm going to work on blocking. Okay, what specifically are you going to work on? All right, I'm going to work on blocking in this very specific situation. He'd say, okay, you work on that. And then the next game, they would lose. And when they lost, he would walk up to that same player and he said, hey, I was watching you during the game. You did better at blocking those. You missed one, but you did way better at blocking those. What are you going to work on this week? And he did that until the team started winning. And once it started winning, it started picking up all kinds of things. But that concept of what are you working on is a huge thing. See, we have to do this a lot now because, unfortunately, we've got a dangerous situation with our educational system right now. This was from the Washington Post, by the way. This was back a couple years ago now. This was January of 2012. And that's where that quote came from. See how effective that is? So here was the issue. Some brilliant psychologist, I believe it was, did some research and found out that people with high self-esteem tend to accomplish more. It was a correlation. And not everyone in the world has chanted, correlation is not causation. Just because it's related doesn't mean that one causes the other. If you go across the United States, there is a huge positive correlation between the number of bars and churches in a given city. We could suggest that perhaps with all those churches in a certain city, if there's a lot of churches, people would be afraid of going to hell. They need to go to the bar and drink to kind of relieve those fears. Or it could be that people go and drink a lot and therefore they go to church to repent. You know, probably that could cause back and forth. But there's another big factor in there, right? Which is, I heard it over here, population. If you have a big city, you have a lot of bars and you have a lot of churches. In a little tiny burg, you have less bars and less churches. By the way, there's an inverse relationship between the number of PhDs and asses in a given state. That one takes some thinking. Now, the idea here is just because two things are correlated doesn't mean they're causal. Unfortunately, they didn't know this in educational system. They went out to California. They went through the self-esteem concept where we're going to make all the kids feel really, really good. And then because high self-esteem is related to achievement. Once they have high self-esteem, of course, they're going to have great achievement. And they did that. It caught on. It swept the nation. And next thing you know, we have a 20-year self-esteem movement in higher education. Basically looks like you didn't fail. You just didn't succeed yet. Wasn't exactly what I was after, but it's a good response. Things like, could somebody name an ocean? How about Lake Superior? Boy, that's a really good answer. No, it's not. It has the word lake in it. So the response could be, perhaps you didn't hear me. I said, name an ocean. What you gave me was a lake. But instead we would say, that was a really good try because I see what you're going for. There's a lot of water in that one. When we do this so we all feel good, and then we make sure that nobody feels left out, So the idea is that everybody wins, everybody's great, all this is fabulous, and when you do that and you get to that point, the problem you get into is you start losing the real good feedback and how do you get better. So if you can put that with the feedback, that's good, but this point here is, for decades of prevailing wisdom of education, higher self-esteem would lead to high achievement. The theory led to an avalanche of daily affirmations, award ceremonies, and attendance certificates, but few, if any, academic gains. We've seen almost no academic gains as a result of this. Increasing number of students are weaning themselves from what they call empty praise, drawing on psychology and brain research. Ooh, I love the brain research. That's pervasive these days. Everybody loves brain-based learning stuff. I did a special issue of a journal on brain-based learning. I have written a book that's basically brain-based learning stuff, and I'm capitalizing on the concept that people love it because I got their attention. And then I switched to cognitive psychology just like that. Because in the school settings, I'm just going to say this outright, there's very little that you can do to change people's brains. What you can do is look at how their brains are used to do different things. But I think next we're going to do spleen-based learning. Oh, kidney-based learning. When should you go to the bathroom? I think there's some other good... So the point is, be careful about that really fancy kind of concept. There's some really good stuff about how the brain works, but be careful with it. Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, I'm firmly convinced that this increase in self-esteem has led to entitlement, which is the other correlation to that. But just out of curiosity, when you're working with different populations, have they fine-tuned to the fact that we're working with students that are brought up in a two-parent household with money, with the opportunities that are afforded, versus a student that's in an inner-city school? And I kind of, and again, I'm not putting this down, but I think that there's also that, where self-esteem for students who are brought up in an atmosphere where they're not getting anything at home, perhaps there's not a direct correlation to not being.
So let me throw in there, this is...
Just curious.
No, this is fine. This is a part that I periodically have to do for myself too, is I'm thoroughly convinced I mean, I'll throw some stuff up here too, but by the way, keep in mind, I'm a psychologist, which means the whole world is a distribution. Sometimes it's a normal distribution, sometimes it's skewed, sometimes it's all different shapes of distributions, but all kinds of distributions. The idea of a specific point doesn't exist. So there's nothing that we can do that will meet the needs of everybody. That just doesn't happen. So we do talk about generalities at times, and we always have to be careful. I remember one time of actually walking up to my daughter and say, so how does it feel to be a loser? Not a common phrase that I would suggest you use amongst your students or your children, but I will tell you in this, and I'm coming right back to this, but in this very specific case, my daughter had agreed in 3rd grade to run a race. There was going to be a track race. She runs like a gazelle, but she didn't work at it at all. After 3 months later, after she had signed up, the day of the track meet came up, it was a school, not a track meet, it was just a school outing kind of thing. She looked at me, she says, yeah, Daddy, I'm not going to do it. And I had volunteered to run with her and practice with her. She was always busy. It was cold. She had to do something else. She was with her friends. So the day comes up and she says, I'm not going to. I said, oh, no, honey. You signed up for it. You're going to do it. That's part of the rules of growing up, is you're going to learn responsibility. She ran it, came into last place. When she came in last place, they were giving out the little trophies, 1st place, 2nd place, 3rd place, 4th place, 5th place, 6th place. Participation and tries real hard. She got a tries real hard trophy, if I remember correctly, which was ironic to me because she didn't try at all. But the idea was self-esteem there. So what I wanted to do is I walked up to her and I said, you got the trophies and everything, but I just want to know, how does it feel to have lost the race? You're a loser. That's what losing means. You're a loser. How does it feel? And I love you, but how does that feel? She said, it stinks. I said, how would you make that feeling go away? She said, well, I guess I could have practiced. And I said, if you practiced, do you believe you could have beat all of them? She said, I don't know if I could have beat all of them, but I know I could have beat most of them. I said, I think you could have beat them all. You think you could beat most. How about if we work at this and come back and do this again? And what I was fighting was the fact that she was holding a trophy. So we were going back and forth. But what I was really trying to get across is, I love you, you're fabulous, and I know you can do this, but you have a physiological feeling right now that you lost. Let's work off that and do something. So I think there's certain individuals that if you say to them, I believe in you and I think you are amazing, but what you just turned in is not where it should be, you can be supportive and give good solid feedback. Not everybody has to have the trophy, but they do have to have, I really believe this, they have to have the support. And I think the days of basically saying to somebody, you're a loser, deal with it, and walking away, which is what my political science teacher did. because he was thoroughly convinced. And afterwards, I even told him, after I finished the class, I got an A in the class. And I said to him, I said, you know, I got an A in the class, so who's the loser now? And he smiled. He said, you were never a loser, but I knew if I called you one, you would step up, because students do that. And I still remember to this very day, I looked right at him and said, not all do, and I walked away. Because he thought that's the way you motivate people, was by calling them a loser, and that would motivate them. It did, so this is back to the point, it did for me. It didn't for my friend who dropped out of school. When you go off to college, I have a friend who dropped out of college because she ran out of money, and one person immediately after she dropped out said, nobody drops out because of lack of money. What's it cost, like $1,000 for tuition? She just couldn't cut it. I said, you know, she was broke. And so that concept of we are all different. So yeah, I think we have to be very, very careful with all of these things. So I do think the fine-tuned praise is big. Figuring out how to give feedback is trickier than it has ever been. Because if you've spent your entire life with people telling you, you started to color, and someone says, you are just a phenomenal, look at you color, you are a great colorer, I will put this up on the refrigerator, you are the best colorer ever. No feedback, just you're a great colorer. And as you go up through life, you color, then you start drawing, and your drawings are always award-winning drawings. And then you take an art class. And in my art class, I'm not an art class teacher, so I'm going to have to make this part up. I say to you, well, actually, before I say anything to you, you get ready to hand, like the Christmas story. I'm going to bestow a story that is the best story ever told by humans. You hand me this thing that you've drawn that's just I'm going to be in awe and weep over this thing. And when I look at it, I say, you know, this is a nice foundational, you've got some good skills here. The light isn't consistent. It's not coming from one angle. And I think for shading, you might want to work on the shading here a little bit, but it's a really good start. If you've been told your whole life you're phenomenal, now you're told that. And you could generalize this to every one of your classes. If I've always been told I'm great and you're telling me I need to work at it, either my whole life's a lie or there's a problem with you. And so we have to work at this. How do we not be the person that's the wake-up call to say, I know you've gotten an A every time you've ever taken a class, but this is crappy work and it won't work here. So we have to say, in the past, the work you've done has probably been fabulous and wonderful. Here's the grading rubric. Here's the spot where you hit the rubric. Here's the spot where you missed the rubric, but I know you can get there. So yeah, I think we do have to work through that. But fine-tune and figure out how to do that. But in its medical school, whoosh, I will tell you very quickly, my life is not all wonderful right now. 5,600 people applied for 180 slots at our medical school. 5,600 people applied for 180 slots. These are not stupid people. By the way, GPA, 3.49, I believe it was. We're pushing it down as far as we can. Isn't that cool? If a student comes up to you and says, you know, if I get an A- or a B+ in this class, you've ruined my chance to go to medical school. I don't know about law school and everything else, but I can tell you for any of your students that want to be doctors, you have not ruined their chance to get into med school at all. You want to know how to ruin their chance to get to medical school? Help them get a 4.0 in their courses, take all tough courses, and do absolutely nothing else. And I don't know about other medical schools, they will not, a 4.0 will not get you into UNC because you have to have experiences. 3.6, and you help rebuild a village in Uganda, you got a shot. A 3.7, and your small rural community in Nebraska, you help them actually redo their politics, you got a shot. Those are things that college students can do, but it's not all about all A's. So giving them some real good praise and saying, but you got to work on these other things, huge. This is an old quote here, but the concept here is coming back to this whole thing about we can't, it's not all, boy, teaching, what a tough gig. So here's something you come to a teaching workshop for. I'm going to tell you right now, I believe teaching is almost impossible because of all the stuff we have to do. Not only do you have to understand, now the whole thing about how students learn and stuff, here's a cool idea just to keep in mind. Teachers don't typically get taught how to teach, right? We all know that one. I got my PhD in psychology. What that demonstrated in psychology, those of you who are in psych, I know the psych stuff, a PhD in psychology means you have demonstrated that you have the ability to advance the field. I can come up with a research question, I can collect data, I can analyze the data, I can interpret the data, and I can get it out into a formula or a format that you can look at and say, you have just advanced the field, and if I do that really, really well, I got a PhD on doing that. Then they said, oh, and by the way, go teach that class. So the concept of teaching is something we don't really often teach. Some schools do, which is great, but we don't often do that. Now here's the cool part. We also don't teach our students how to learn. Those brilliant students that come into your class with a 4.0 and get all A's, you know what? I've been laying awake, the stuff, I always love the phrase, what keeps you up at night? Here's what keeps me up at night lately. B+ through A+ level students who don't really work very hard to get it. What could they really achieve? Those B and C, B- and C+ students who study for hundreds of hours to get their B's and their C's, is there any chance at all that they're totally wasting their time and they're putting a lot of energy into something that they could do in a lot less time and learn it faster? So if we don't teach teachers how to teach and students how to learn, it's hard to move forward. By the way, academia is really well balanced because we don't teach administrators how to lead either. You become a good chair. If you're a good faculty member, you become a chair. Or sometimes if you're really bad, you become a chair because it gets you out of the classroom. But that's a whole different political arena. If you're really good at teaching, you become a chair. If you become a chair and you're really good at it, you might become an associate dean, maybe a dean, then you might become a provost. It's very rare that somebody just walks in and becomes a president. And I talked to the president at UNC Chapel Hill and I said, when you became a president, I said, how'd that feel? He said, it scared me to death. He said, I didn't go to president class. I didn't go to president workshops. I became a president. When I got the job, I sat at a desk and I thought, I'm responsible for everything around here. So that concept of we teach people, and the way you get away with all that, by the way, this is so cool. Not you guys, all of us, is we're in higher education. People don't question what we do. You get really brilliant people together and you watch what emerges. Isn't that cool? So now, for teaching. If we're going to do this well, one of the things, amongst everything else, one of the things we have to figure out is how do you discount knowledge to the spot where students understand it? And that's what you're doing every day. You're an expert. They're a novice. You have to discount your knowledge so that you can think a little bit as if you were a novice, and then you help move them up a bit. It's all about the delta. So we help move up. We help them move up in content, basic content. We help them move up in critical thinking. We help them move up in search skills. We help them move up in social skills. But we got to think like they do and move up. And if you don't do that, then you just get frustrated over and over again. You know, my gosh, how hard is it really to learn the Krebs cycle? Classical conditioning, is it really that hard? I mean, there's an unconditioned stimulus, a conditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, and conditioned response. There's 4 things. How hard is that? Schedules of reinforcement. I mean, gosh, there's only a couple of schedules. My favorite phrase once was a faculty member once that someone spoke of him and said, his problem is he's been teaching biology for 20 years and his students still don't get it. Great. So you have to be careful about what this all means. And so what it means is breaking it down. So here's what we all sound like from time to time.
For a number of years now, work has been proceeding in order to bring perfection to the crudely conceived idea of a transmission that would not only supply inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal grammeters. Such an instrument is the turboencabulator. Now, basically, the only new principle involved is that instead of power being generated by the relative motion of conductors and fluxes, it is produced by the modial interaction of magneto-reluctance and capacitive directance. The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite surmounted by a malleable logarithmic casing in such a way that the 2 spurving bearings were in a direct line with a panametric fam. The latter consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal vanes so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented.
You can get rid of the side fumbling, you're all golden. So the issue we get into, of course, is that every teacher, sooner or later, at some point in your career, sounds like this. Piaget wrote about it years and years ago. Vygotsky has written about it years ago. Dewey wrote about it years and years ago. One of the most difficult things you can do as a teacher is to break your knowledge down and say, okay, this is where I need to teach at. And if you don't think about it from time to time, I'd tell you what, it's an amazing thing to think about because you don't get multiple shots at this. If you go into class and if I teach a class and I realize I was way over your head, if I'm way over your head, it's frustrating, you don't learn anything. Okay, so the next day I come in, I back it down, and if I come too low, now it's boring. If I'm below your level, I bore you. If I'm above your level, I frustrate you. And the worst thing is you don't stay still. as soon as you learn something, your boredom increases because you need to learn more, and your frustration tolerance is better because you're moving up into a range where it used to frustrate you, but now you get it. So you have students that are moving up all the time. They're a moving target, which is what we want. The other frustrating thing is you're all different. You're at a certain pace, you're at a certain pace, you're at a certain level. So background knowledge probes, finding out what the students know before you start is huge. Understanding if they're getting it at any given point is massive. So that concept is a difficult one, but we do it. It's what we do. We're teachers. This is, oh, by the way, these are some signs that are actually out. I just Googled or Binged. I can't remember which. I got to be careful. I'm trying to be fair about the whole thing. But you go out and look for bad road signs. These are road signs, like this one. No person shall, on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday, the day preceding a public holiday or on a public holiday, drive or cause to be driven between the hours of 6 p.m. and midnight a motor vehicle which exceeds 10.5 meter in length on all main roads. That's why you're driving along. I still think it'd be cool for a police officer to say, excuse me, I'm going to have to cite you for causing the vehicle to have been driven. I mean, that's a great one. But what we've got are people who make a decision and say, this is a good way to transmit information. This isn't by itself, right? There would be a no turn on red, there'd be a speed limit sign. And then people don't even think it through, and they come up with really stupid, conflicting things. And so one of the things that I've been talking to students more and more about, and I say, what is it that really drives you crazy about faculty? I love this question now. What drives you crazy about faculty? We could do the same one about students. And it's not to bash students. Talk periodically about what drives you crazy, because I had a great mentor one time. Well, I still do. He's a great guy. He said, here's the deal. As I was learning how to teach, he was my teaching mentor. I have a mentor team. He's my teaching mentor. He says, you can complain about something 3 times, and after you've complained about it 3 times, either do something about it or shut up. Because after you've complained about it 3 times, you just become a person who complains about that thing a lot. I had complained about my students' inability to take notes 3 times, at which point he says, hey, that was 3. He listened to me very patiently all 3 times, but at the end of the 3rd time he said, oh, that's 3. So I thought to myself, all right, my intro psych students can't take notes. They don't seem to be good at it. So I think what I'm going to do is take 5 minutes the next class period. I'm going to teach them just a couple of things about notes. And here's what I came up with. Genius that I am. I said, there are 4 situations in which you need to take notes, to write something down. Number 1, if I repeat it, write it down. Psychology was founded in 1879. 1879. If you think about 1879, listen to me. I said 1879 3 times. You should write that down. If I spell something, write it down. It was founded by Wundt, actually probably James, but we'll give Wundt credit. So Wundt, W-U-N-D-T, it was German, so it's pronounced Wundt even though it starts with a W, W-U-N-D-T. I spelled it and I repeated it. Write it down. 3rd one is if I write it down. If I run up to the board and write something down like Wundt, 1879, you write it down. So if I repeat it, if I spell it, if I write it down, write it down. The 4th one is if there's a dramatic pause. And I told that to my students the next class period. I look out and they're taking more notes. All I did was give them a little tiny framework for 18-year-olds in a big classroom of 200 students. Here sometimes you write things down. So think about what messages and what you're doing. By the way, so that was the student one. When I asked the students what drives you crazy about faculty, one of the primary things that comes out, inconsistencies. Papers are due on Friday, no exceptions. Then on Wednesday, you hear somebody say, I'll tell you what, we've been really under a lot of stress. There's been a lot going on. If you want to turn the papers in Monday, you can turn the papers in Monday. Yeah, you just got done telling us it was Friday. It's not a matter of you just happen to change it. Some people will actually line up childcare. Some people will build their schedules around this. I've got students who will change their work schedule for exams. So when I move an exam, it isn't just that I happen to move it to give them more time. I may have changed it from a student having an entire week they scheduled off because they have a big exam on Friday to the following Friday when they have to work double shifts to make up for the time they've scheduled off. So consistency is huge. I use the signs because sometimes we look at them and say, why would people do this? Misconfusion, or misconfusion. That'd be good. That'd be actually clarity. What does this mean right here? It's one of those things that when you're moving quickly, this is a pretty easy one. It's a one-way road coming towards you for which you can ride a bicycle into traffic as long as you stay in that lane. There's ways that you could actually do signage that would help with that. But sometimes we do things that seem clear to us but not clear to others. Oh, by the way, this is one. It's on the same post. I love that. And my absolute favorite one that I stumbled across recently was this one. I'm still thinking maybe that's how they get rid of tourists. But it's not a through street, but it's an evacuation route. But these are kind of the one that you run into all of these kind of cool signs around though. One of my favorites I saw, I couldn't get a picture fast enough, it was this caution children at play, a great big sign that says caution children at play. And as you're going around the corner, I look to the right, it's this massive cemetery. And I thought, what kind of a community do you have where the children are all playing in the cemetery? It was just that was just a different one, but that's, stuff that's funny. So how do we do this? Here's a quick example. You could memorize this. It wouldn't be that hard, actually. Last Sunday, Flingeldob and Pribben were in the Birdling, Treppering, Gloopy Cables, and Gleamy Burley Grep. Suddenly, a Diddy Strezzle boofed into Flingeldob's Tresk. Pribben glaved to a Flingeldob. Each hive that Diddy Strezzle is tuning in your grep. Okay, cool. Now, check this out. If I ask you a couple of questions, this is one I want to really be careful, then I got to go back and have you do something here. If I ask you a couple of questions about this, now don't shout out an answer. Just think about it for a second here. When did Flingeldob and Pribben go to the Birdlink? If you looked at this and I ask you, don't say anything yet, but when did they go to the Birdlink? Okay, as a group, when would it be? Look at you guys go. All right. What kind of capels were they treppering? What kind of capels were they? They were very good, gloopy cables. Let's see. What did Flingeldob do? What did the Dizzy Strezzle do to Flingeldob's Tresk? That's what I'll do, score that one. What did he do to the Tresk? He boofed. I would take boofed or boofed into. So if I ask you those questions, you're actually answering questions of this, which is pretty cool. Suppose this isn't up there for the quiz, but you've memorized it. You could memorize this. It's Jabberwocky kind of stuff, right? Doesn't have the meter and stuff, but you could memorize this. If the next question was, what do you imagine happened next? Now, of course, it becomes a different level of question. What do you think happened next up here? You could answer, but let's move on to the final question. Based on the incidents in the story, why do you think Flingeldob and Pribben went to the Birdlink? Are they likely to return? Why or why not? All right. Now, if I didn't have the experience of Chris helping me to write a good grading rubric, and I actually taught a class without a good grading rubric, which would be a hideous thing to do, I might actually score those questions I just gave you 10 points apiece. You got the first three right, no problem at all. So those would be 10, 10, and 10. Maybe you, without a grading rubric, you write a couple of things down. So I gave you a couple points on that. What do you imagine happened next? And then you write a little bit on why they went there. So I gave you 2 points here and 3 points here because you wrote a lot. So that would give you like 35 points out of 50. Ooh, 35 points out of 50 is 70%, which is a C minus. Now, of course, a C minus would cause a student to come to your office and say, hey, Dr. Z, I got a C minus and I don't get C minuses. To which I would like to respond, well, you do now, but you can't say that. So I would probably typically gone with a C minus represents a good foundation of information. However, in this class, you're going to have to work a little bit harder because this isn't some basic course. It's a more advanced course. And I used to say that kind of stuff a lot. Now I think real carefully about what they're doing because if they memorized the material and got a C minus, it may be that they're working. Remember those people I talked about, the B minus, C plus students who work for hundreds of hours and ends up with C's and B's? It could be they worked really, really hard to get that grade. It also could be that they skimmed the material and got it. I don't know why they got this. So the first thing I have to look at is which questions they missed. Or have them look. This is my new favorite one. I want you to look at the questions you missed. Bloom's taxonomy lists 6 levels. I'm only interested in 3. Is it a basic knowledge question? Basic knowledge question means you don't have to understand anything about this. You just have to be able to answer it. Check this out. This is one of my favorites. 5 great, imagine you have no knowledge at this moment. Just for a second. If you have your tabula rasa, you have no knowledge. I'm going to teach you the very first thing that you have in your brand new brain. There are 5 lakes that surround Michigan. Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. Of these 5 Great Lakes, Superior is the deepest. Brand new brains and everything. Which of the following lakes is the deepest? Is it Huron, Ontario, Erie, or Superior? Which is the deepest? Superior. Superior. At this moment, I don't know if you know what a lake is. Right? Isn't that cool? I don't know if you know what deep means. I don't know if you know anything about this, just like how long is a Cerny, or when is Cerny? We don't know, but we know it was last Cerny. So the point is, students can memorize things and learn things without really knowing what they're doing. So we have to look at, number one, is it just a knowledge thing? Number two, is it something you apply? Or is it, number three, something you have to really think about, either through synthesis, analysis, or whatever. And if students start looking at the questions and saying, boy, you know, I'm getting a lot of the ones that are just basic knowledge questions, but I can't seem to do the application stuff. And it's not easy for them to do this, but thinking it through helps, because if you don't understand the material and you get a C, you're working hard. So one of my favorite questions, by the way, is to ask my students now. If they come and say, if they're struggling, just say, what do you think of the material? What do you think about this stuff? They'll say, what do you mean? So what do you think about it? Teaching biochemistry. So what do you think about all this? Well, it's hard. Yeah, it's biochemistry. What do you think about it? And if you try a couple times, what you're going for is a response to say, you know, tell you the truth, I don't get it. I just don't get it. And I'll tell you, just all the way back to that F minus I'm talking about, if I'm your student and I have a C minus in your class and I'm telling you that I'm not getting it, please assume at that moment that I am working really, really hard. How in the world do you pull off a C minus in a class when you don't know what's going on, other than working really hard at it? If I tell you, on the other hand, you know, I don't like this stuff, which is it's different from I don't get it. Yes, this stuff just doesn't make any sense to me. Okay, does it not make any sense because I don't see any value to it, or because I don't understand what it's after? You got to tease that out. If I don't like it and I'm not interested in it, there's a different reason I got a lower grade. The whole time I'm studying, I'm thinking about all the stuff I do like, which is not what I'm studying. If I'm really trying to get it and I just don't understand it, that's a different realm. I've been talking for too long here, and I got to have you try something real quickly. So I'm going to have you try something in small groups. We're going to try groups of 4 this time. I like mixing up the size of the groups. So you got to look at, by the way, whenever somebody says to get into groups, you should always quickly look out of the corner of your eye like this. Because otherwise you get stuck into a situation where you go, no, that's just mean. All right, we'll go with the groups of 4. Here's what I'm after. How do you know your students are getting it, or how could you know? The issue here is, how do we know when our students are understanding material? So going back to that video of the guy talking gibberish, the Flingeldoben Pribben kind of thing, how do you know your students are getting it? And I'm going to make it kind of tricky on a day-to-day basis, and I'm taking away off the table exams, because I'm a firm believer. If I teach intro psych and I have 4 exams in my class, those 4 exams are really no more, they're not formative. I think they're summative. I believe I have lots of formative things I'm going to do in class. Formative and summative. Formative means an assessment that allows you to build and gain new knowledges and get better at it. Summative is, I just want to know, where are you? I do a lot of formative stuff, and that's what I'm after here. What can we do formative to help the students understand where they're at and how to build it? Summative means I'm giving you the test, you score a 90, you score an 83, you score a 97. I get a sense of where you're at, and you know where you're at. That's what that test is for. I think tests are too late to actually help you learn the material. That time's kind of gone. So what do you do to help the students get it? So let's take like 3 minutes, because I got a lot more stuff to do too. So it's going to be fast. 3 minutes to come up with some ideas on how do you help, or how do you know when your students are getting it? How do you know your students are understanding the material? Try this for 3 minutes. What I've done thus far too is, whenever I do something that's kind of quick in class, I do it in the same way. It's like, there's totally different teaching styles. There's individuals who will have great big projects that will go on for the whole semester. There are people who will say, for the class period, get together and do this. I'm a big fan of saying, okay, you got 30 seconds to do this, you got 90 seconds, you got 3 minutes. It does keep people on task, but it also doesn't give you a lot of in-depth discussions. So the point is, you pick them. Sometimes I do give a lot more time, but the point is, think about how much time you're giving. The other one, before I lose the sense of what's happening, I also like to do this, especially in my own campus on faculty development workshops, because you don't need me running this session. You don't need Chris running the session. Basically, you can have a conversation with a colleague at any time. You can also call him. But you can call someone and say, hey, I'm thinking about trying this in the classroom. What do you do that's like this? Amazing conversations you can have, just like you just had. So let's just see here. Reporting out, what's a couple of the things that you came up with? How do we know if our students are getting it? So what's some ways? Yes?
Todd, we asked students in our group, how you tell us, how do your professors know when you're getting it?
And what did y'all say? See, I learned, by the way, I'm from Michigan, but I learned to say y'all.
They told us,
No, wait, you don't need to speak for them because they're sitting right there. Oh, you didn't know she's going to put you on the spot. So how do you know, how do your faculty know when you know?
I kind of just said, like, don't always find intelligence on test taking, because I feel like I know the information, like, verbally, like, I can talk about it, but, like,
Yep.
when you narrow it down to only, like, figuring it out, like, I don't think it's a bad test grade, like, you can't prove to a teacher that you know the information,
Sure.
because, like, I know it, but, like, I'm not a good test taker, so, like, that doesn't prove to them that I know it, so I feel like if you have a conversation with them, like, in class, like, orally, like, that's how you know I know it.
Excellent. So huge one here is the fact that you've actually had a chance to talk, right? And not now, I mean in class.
Yeah.
So in class, when you have a chance to express your opinions and talk, then the teacher knows if you're getting it or not, which is perfect. That's fabulous. Yes?
Yeah, I was also saying to them too, like, even at the beginning of class, if you kind of like brush over what you just went over, it's like each day is a new day. So you kind of got to like bring back what you just brought in, refresh their memory, and then bring it forward. And then while you're bringing it forward, if you have something that kind of tied into what you said like 1 class, 2 classes ago, like bring that back up and see if they still remember. If they don't, then reiterate it really quick.
Perfect.
Just kind of like keep refreshing our heads.
By the way, you guys wouldn't know this, but there's great jargony words to go with all these things. So that's recursive learning. So recursive stuff, I pick it up and I teach it, and then I come back and grab it again, and I come back around. This is basically a medical school technique called a teach back. Just tell me what you know about this topic right now. So these are really good. So that's a really good one too. But also I want to be careful with this is if I pick up the thing to pull it in like you were just saying too, I still don't know if you know it. So how do I know whether you're getting it or not? So what's your favorite? Now I'm putting you on the spot. We talked a little bit. So when you think to yourself in a class, how do you know you've just demonstrated to the teacher you know that you're learning something?
I don't know. I guess like it's hard to do it for an entire class.
Right.
But I think if you're thinking about from an individual standpoint, like if you were to ask me like a certain, you could be like, all right, tell me what you know about the transmission of pain in the nervous system.
Perfect. Yep.
And then like you start like explaining it to the teacher, and then like they should have an open ear to what you're saying, like not just like putting like, all right, here's the right thing, like let's see what they say, and then just keep comparing it and then shooting them down. Like listen to what they have to say. Be like, all right, I like what you said about this and this and this, but it's not entirely correct. But like it actually goes like this. You're on the right track.
Yes. Good. Really good. So the same type of thing. If the students aren't talking, so here's the big one you can get from both these, and I suspect this has happened from all your conversations. If the students aren't doing something, it's really hard to know whether or not they're getting it. It's amazing how often you still see classes, though, where the instructor's doing all the teaching. You walk into class, I teach all the material, I can go tell my colleagues, that was like the best class ever. We went over the distribution of sample means, I nailed it. I hit that so well. Those students, just the way I covered it, they all know it now so well. When they come into your research methods class, you can ask any one of them, and they're going to tell you about the distribution of sample means like that. The only problem with that whole great story and me feeling so good about myself is I don't have a clue if the students learned it, because they may have been texting the whole time. They might also have just been checked out. They might have been listening really intently and not understanding anything. As I heard a student one time look at me and said, "Whew, Dr. Z, I don't know anything about classical conditioning, but I'd listen to you talk about dirt. You get so excited about this stuff." I said, "About what?" She said, "All the course stuff." Like what? So, you know, students will like faculty members who have energy and excitement, because a lot of faculty don't. And I shouldn't say a lot, some don't. So the point here is having the students take some time. So anybody else, real quickly, one more. So other than calling on students and having students talk, how else can you check real quick? Yes?
So we were talking about the response fair, and I learned something really good from Michelle, the idea of, so I use it, and I'll like have a random question, and then I'll let them talk to each other.
Okay.
So now I don't know if they just got the answer right because they got their neighbor's answer. So she said maybe have them do it silently first, and then see where they're at, and then let them talk and change their answer.
Excellent. And what did you say at the very beginning, using which thing?
The response where.
Okay.
Yeah.
So SR, student response system. Yes, good.
So I thought that was great. But
Fabulous. Eric Mazur, who just won a massive, massive teaching award prize, who's at Harvard, came up with this concept test kind of thing. And what he would do is he stopped, this is the way it all started. He stopped after 15 minutes of teaching physics, and he put a multiple choice question up there. How many of you think it's, and he started out with just people raising their hands. You know, you can have student response systems which are really, really good for demonstrating data and bar graphs and stuff up there, and also for anonymity in case people are really nervous. But in addition to responseware, one way you can do it is have people raise their hands, because it doesn't cost anything extra at the beginning of the semester for you to have an hand. And on top of that is almost no students ever forget them. It's great. They bring them to class every class period. One of the things I've been playing around with recently was having people raise their hand and say, I also want you to put up the number of fingers based on how comfortable you are. 5 means I know that C is the right answer, because I'd put up a multiple choice. How many think it's A? How many B? How many C? How many D? If you know it's C, you raise your hand at C like this. This would mean I'm pretty sure, I think I know it, I'm not too sure, I'm mostly guessing, and this is C, and it's a total blind guess. By the way, I tell my students all too, if you're going to use one finger, this is the one you use. So, response-where, ask, but if you do ask first, which do you think it is, A, B, C, D, now turn to your neighbor, convince your neighbor, then yes, then that's a good one to first see if they've got it. And here's the big one. If they do get it, here's the best teaching tip of the day. If you want to be a really good teacher and change the way you teach, you think about this. You'll think it's funny at first, but I'm telling you, it'll change your life. Stop teaching when somebody knows it, when they get it. Just stop. That is the hardest thing to do. If I'm going to teach you about distribution of sample means, oh no, here's a good one. Dr. Z, I just don't quite get the variability calculation. I'm just confused on it. And I say, well, the big thing to keep in mind is in a denominator, it's n for a population and n minus 1 for a sample. That's it. That's where I made my mistake. Okay, thanks. Well, wait, before you go, the other thing you got to be careful about, I'm still teaching. The person said, I got it, I'm good, I'm still teaching. You'll have the same phenomenon when you ask people for directions. They'll tell you the directions, and when you say, okay, I got it, thank you. Oh, no, it never ends there. Well, one of the tricky things is, you know, that one road's going to fork. Yeah, I need to go to the right. Yes, you do. Because if you go to the left, just told you I got to go to the right. I know that one. So the point is, stop teaching and then catch the spot they don't know and spend your focus there. So that's the big one. Okay, I'm going to move on. Oh, go ahead.
I just have a question about, because I like the idea of the discussion, I like the idea of asking, I like to call on my students. How do you deal with that when you have 200 students?
Oh, excellent. That's a really good point. Each person gets no more than a minute each time you call in the whole class. 200 students, that'd be 200 minutes. That's too long. No, it's really good sampling. So basically what you can do is, and I'll just throw this one out there real quickly, is biggest class I've taught has been 200. I did have 3 sections of 200 that were back to back. Actually, 9 to 10, 10 to 11, and then 1 to 2. So I did get a little bit of a break in there. Worst part was trying to remember where I told the stories. So that was just awful. You get the students talking to each other is the big one, and you can so one of the best methods is you just listen to the conversations. Just wander around while they're talking. So you do a think, pair, share, where you say, think for, okay, last time that you really believed that classical conditioning actually impacted you, that you felt classical conditioning in the gut. I want you to think about when that was, turn to your neighbor, and talk about it. And then I can wander around the room, and I hear the conversations. Someone says, oh, you know, I went into a bakery, or walked by a bakery, and I just couldn't help myself, and I walked in and got a donut. And I didn't even want a donut. Well, that's a good example. If somebody says, well, I went to the beach and a seagull flew down at me and I ducked because I was scared. It's like, wow, that's not right at all. And so as I walked around the room, so you can do that. And then what you can do is then call on a couple of groups. But typically what I will do, another little teaching tip that I've got, I don't have any evidence for this one, it's just one I like. I will ask for volunteers in a big group. I'll ask for a couple of volunteers. And once I get like 2 good responses and I can say, that was good, that's good, what'd you come up with? The issue here now is I've gotten the good responses that I liked and I've acknowledged they're good, then I'll call on people because I do that. Because if I call on people first, I got tired of people saying, well, I don't know if this is what you want, or I don't think this is right, but. That just gets tiring because it sets up a negative tone. I don't like negative tones. So if I've said, that's really good, what'd you come up with, then they can come up. So I just randomly call on a half a dozen people. And by the way, if somebody says, one of my absolute favorites, groups of 4 working things, and I call on a group and the group says, yeah, we didn't actually get to it. Sorry. You know how the concept of praising publicly and punishing privately? I wish they'd never said that. I don't like it. And here's why I don't like it, because it's different individuals. Some individuals that works really, really well for, but if you've got a massive introvert and you praise them publicly, they will stop responding. The definition of punishment in psychology, definition of punishment is you have something that happens, a consequence, and it decreases the probability of response. If you offer something and I say, that's really good, that was a really good thing, I walked by your group, you're a genius, really well done. If I do that a couple times and you stop participating, that means me publicly praising you is a punishment. Isn't that cool? It's a punishment. It's not in your head what you think is good or bad. Behavior just went down. So then I would praise privately. I'd come over and say, hey, I didn't want to say anything in front of the whole group, but that was amazing. And then that person shines. The other thing is, if I said this group and I say, oh, that's okay, and I move on, I don't want to say something negative publicly, but now you all think they got away with it. So you have to be careful. Sometimes you have to say, well, you got to stay on task. Or my favorite, I'm a giver. It's what I do. I'm a giver. I want to help people. So when I call on a group and they say, yeah, we didn't actually get to it, I'd say, that's okay with a lot. And this is when you're all listening, because I'm calling them. Yeah, in a big group like this, it's really hard to focus. Hang around after class. I've got a couple tips so that next time you can really focus on the task. So stick around after class. We'll chat. Now, how about you guys? See how I was so helpful for them? And then at the end of class, what I would do is say, all right, now on Friday we're going to pick up chapter 6. And this is with 200 students. I would say, on Friday we're going to pick up chapter 6. So you all make sure to read chapter 6 and do the questions at the end of the chapter. Any other questions? No? All right, take off. Now you guys. And usually now everybody stands up and they know that I've held them accountable. And the first time I do it in a class, what I would literally say, I would walk over and say, you don't need help, do you? And they would say, no. And I'd say, okay, cool, take off. That's all I needed. All I needed was everyone else to know they were held accountable. I don't need to be mean. I don't need to say, it's really important that you focus because this class is important to me. I work really, really hard. I'm now teaching when I don't need to be teaching. They know I'm disappointed. I'm done. So yeah. So that's how I try to help people out by selectively calling on different people. Not everybody has to respond. By the way, that's another big one too. Sorry, I'm kind of off the topic here, but these are good topics. If you put your class, if you got a class of 30 students and you got 6 groups of 5, all the groups don't have to report out every time. I learned this from an English prof who basically told me, and it still seems weird to me, you don't have to grade everything students write. And when I said, see to some of you teaching English or teaching classes, and now you immediately say, that's true. Other people say, wait a minute. If your students complain if you don't read everything they write and grade it, I finally figured out how to get it across to them. I don't test you over everything you learn. If you're learning in my cognitive class, you're memorizing all the dates of different studies, you learn who did which study. What I do on a test is I randomly sample from the material. And if I do a good job of randomly sampling and asking you 100 points worth of stuff, and you get 80% of that, think about what we're doing on tests. My assumption is, had I grabbed all the material, you would have gotten about 80% of the material. I took a subset and I tested you. And yet for some reason we think if I ask you to write, I have to read every page. So my English prof friend said, no, you don't. What you could do is the same as, and that's what I finally said, okay, now I'm buying it, because I didn't before. I'm buying the concept that if I'm going to test a subset of knowledge, I can read a subset of material, and I can ask for a subset of responses. You all did your work, I walked around, I heard some really good things, and sometimes I'll even set it up and say there were 5 groups, or 4 groups in here, 1, 2, 3, 4. I could say, I wandered around, I was listening to all your stuff. You guys came up with some really good stuff. Today we're going to hear from, I'm feeling odd, so we're going to go with odd numbers. So groups 1 and 3, I just want to hear some summaries of what you came up with. Group 1, group 3, thank you very much. Now we're moving on. Groups 2 and 4 didn't speak today. They didn't know that until the last minute, but they don't ever walk up to me afterwards and say, that's rude that you didn't let us talk. They don't say that. So that's one way of doing it. All right. Oh, I threw this Yerkes Dodson law in here. This is from back in like 1902. I just throw this up in here because every once in a while when I get through that last block of stuff, there'll be people who will say, you know what I do is I always create, when I ask how do you know for your students, they'll say, I want a totally comfortable classroom. If I have a totally comfortable classroom, that's when the best learning takes place. We actually know from a long time ago that absolutely totally relaxed, comfortable places aren't where the best learning happens. If I'm really going to get you to think in a different way, that's not totally comfortable. In fact, by definition, that's going to be uncomfortable. I want you at 19 years of age to think differently than you did your entire life. And if you do it really, really well, it's amazing how you can move people, but it's not comfortable. I teach, taught for years. You know, my favorite course is social. I love social psych. My favorite things in social psychology class is to tell my class. I start out with a topic on, we're looking at all kinds of different issues of race and discrimination and prejudice. And I say, number one, we got to think about the word discrimination for a minute. Do you imagine how hideous our lives would be without discrimination? We need it. We have to have discrimination. See, I'm glad it's being taped, because later somebody's going to say, hey, wait, weren't you the guy who said discrimination is good? And now I got to figure out what I mean by that. Is it is good. Discrimination is phenomenally good. If discrimination was not good, really bad, and lunchtime came up, I could start eating this book, which would not be very nutritious. And although it's a pretty good read, it's really not very tasty. Well, I'd assume. I have never tried to eat it. I can discriminate between food and a book. I can also discriminate between McDonald's and another place. I was going to say a decent place, but that seems mean. McDonald's and a place that serves really great grade A Kobe beef burgers. How about if I just go that route? I can discriminate between those two. I'll pay more money for the Kobe beef burger than I do a McDonald's burger. I can very well discriminate between Wendy's and McDonald's. I can discriminate between different kinds of beverages. Discrimination is good. When I sleep at night, I can discriminate between hotels I feel comfortable in and those I feel not comfortable in. When I walk through big cities, I can discriminate between streets I feel comfortable walking in and some I would look down and say, I'm not walking there because I don't know that I would live. That's all good. So the point I'm getting, Fract, is as soon as I start saying discrimination can be good, now when is it bad? I don't assume at that moment in the classroom that everybody's saying, this is so relaxing. I'm thinking right now, this is some tension going on. And the issue here is, we do want some tension, but I also want to point out that massive tension is also not good. So cold calling, I'm just going to say as an instructor here, is that I don't believe that cold calling is a primarily great thing to do unless cold calling is required in the field. So for me to walk around and say, British empiricists. Now the British empiricists are some of the great foundational aspects of psychology. You need to know them. Name 2 British empiricists. Give me one. Go. It's like, I don't know. And it may be the person doesn't know, not because they don't know the British empiricists, because you just scared the crap out of them. So the concept I like to do is some pre-asking of questions. I'll say, write down every British empiricist you can think of right now. Write them down. And don't you guys do it right now. You don't need to. But they'll write them down. And I'll say, okay, give me one from your list. Give me one from your list. Give me one from your list. Now, turn to your neighbors and talk a little bit about this. I basically, when I said, write them down, now what's one from your list, that's a very different thing. What I've done is I've taken the high anxiety and moved it back to just moderate. The point here is that there are people who still love to do cold calling and saying, that's how I know my students know it. And you have to differentiate that. To cold call and to say something means they have to know it and they have to be able to produce it in a big group. Do you really need both? And if you do, go for it. Because I'll tell you one, if you have to be training in a nursing program and you're doing drug calculations, and you say, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to give you a drug calculation, and I'm going to give you 20 seconds, and I'm going to start calling on people, and I want to know what the answer is. And if I call on someone, and this has already been learning for a while, and if a nursing student says, just don't pressure me, I don't like to be pressured. I'm thinking, this might make me feel a little nervous down the road in the hospital. Because if you do have to do a quick calculation, you're going to have to figure this one out. I actually was with a family member recently, a nurse came in, hung a drip, and I'm sitting there watching it, my wife's watching it, we're both staring at the bag. She knows more than I do about this stuff. And I say, are you concerned? She said, yep. I said, me too. She says, yep. So we ring the light, and we come back in, we said, the dosage is wrong. And she says, no, it's not, I did it right. I said, no, it's wrong. She said, well, I'll go check it. But she obviously was getting really nervous right then. Too much comfort makes you a little bit nervous. It actually was set up, it was dripping too fast, and we could tell real quickly. But you want a moderate arousal. I do want to point out, though, that simple tasks, you don't get the decrement in behavior. So if you actually have moved to something that is so fundamentally important that it becomes a knowledge piece of nugget that you have to have, then the cold calling shouldn't disrupt them. I teach history and systems and psychology. There is one date in the entire course, 1879. You have to understand that in 1879 the field was born. 1879. I said it before too. I don't feel bad periodically running around the classroom saying, when was psychology is a science? Oh, 1879. They can do that real well. The rest of it, we work differently at. But, so this, by the way, I try to do for life too. If you're a Little League coach, this is why you call the timeout before the field goal for the opposing team. This is why you call a timeout for the field goal for the opposing team when you're a JV coach. And for a college coach, when you've got a relatively young kicker in there, actually all kickers probably, and for pro, when you've got a new person in there or someone whose contract is about to not be renewed because they're going to get cut for having inconsistent kicking. Timeout every time. If you've got a person in there who's hit 20 of the last 21 field goals, calling timeout does nothing more than allow for a commercial break for everybody to go get a beverage and then watch the winning field goal come, because for a simple task, someone who is automatic, it doesn't really change the behavior at all. The rising the emotion doesn't really do much of anything. You'd be better off to get a lower emotion. We know you got this, it's an easy one, you always make these, go on out and just kick it. See, that would be a better opposing coach statement. So, trying to keep in the moderate amounts, that's where we want to be. All right. Whew. Moderate amounts, careful when we call on people. You can pre-ask questions. There's ways of reducing that anxiety and getting the same behavior. A couple of other quick things. I didn't want to leave time for questions at the end, so I got about 15 minutes here. Learning styles. I have to always mention this because every time I think we're all set here, then I hear somebody saying the best thing you can possibly do for your educational future is to figure out what your learning style is. So these were 4 very, very preeminent psychologists. Bob Bjork, by the way, who is out in UCLA, has a whole learning and forgetting lab. He's doing amazing stuff right now. Desirable difficulties. He's doing a whole bunch of research on this concept that maybe you don't want learning to be easy. We want it to be a little messy and a little difficult. There's undesirable difficulties. That'd be like taking a test with a lot of extraneous noise. Why do that? But there's desirable difficulties where you actually have to work at stuff to get it that's helpful. They went out and looked at all the research on learning styles. And you know what they found, which was pretty cool? When you look at meshing, meshing is me teaching to a specific learning style. I'm going to use the old VART because Neil Fleming's, he's kind of a friend of mine. We're less and less chummy these days. But he came up with this great learning style inventory. You can be visual learners, you can be auditory learners, and kinesthetic learners. So now for my visual learners, I need really good visual stuff. And for my auditory learners, I need really good stories and weaving the material together. Kinesthetic learners, I need ways for you to get in there and do something. We look at when you teach, to what extent does that help? And out of the thousands and thousands of things written about learning styles, there appears to be no data that helps in any way. Knowing your learning style, well, first of all, there's not any really good evidence that you have a learning style. Here's what we found. You have learning preferences. So there's no doubt there's learning preferences. You also have learning proclivities. You have different areas that you tend to be better at than other areas, heavily based on your experience. You see, if your dad is a mechanic, it turns out that you have a high probability of being a kinesthetic learner, that you're really good with your hands. It's not because your brain was born with wiring that made you good with your hands. It's the fact that if you helped him for years and years and years, and my daughter loved to work in cars periodically, if you work with years and years with your hands, you tend to get good at that. And then think about where learning styles come from. We send you to the internet, because the psychologists in the room will agree with me here. If you want to know anything about yourself, you go to the internet and you find a free test. Right? That's where we get all of our best stuff. Free, immediately scored stuff on the internet is always good. So you go to the learning styles inventory, and it's going to ask you questions like, imagine for a moment that you were raised in an artistic family. You have been drawing your whole life. Now you take the inventory. Would you rather work with, if you're going to get to a person's house, would you rather look at a map or would you rather be told the directions? You've been raised in an artistic house. I would rather look at a map, of course. Okay, would you rather do you feel like it's better to use your hands to do something, or would it be better to look at an image of it? Oh, well, by all means, it would be paint a picture. Would it be better to paint a picture or actually crunch some numbers to understand something? Oh, well, by painting. You answer all these questions because this is what you've done. And in the end, the test is going to say you're a visual learner. So first things first, You get labeled visual learner oftentimes because you answer these things that say, this is what I like to do. Now, it doesn't take away from the fact that that's what you're good at. Please don't misunderstand me for that. You are good at that. You're going to do better at things that are visually oriented. That's really good to keep in mind. Here's the thing to keep in mind on this one, though. Imagine for a second, I'm going to teach you how to play a clarinet. None of you know how to play a clarinet. Now, if I'm going to use an old meshing technique, what I should do, I got to be careful with this one. The auditory learners, or no, the visual learners, I will show you hundreds of pictures of clarinets. The fingerings, I will show you notes, I will show you how to read music, all visually you'll see how to play a clarinet. Auditory people, I will explain in great depth how the embouchure should be and how you hold the clarinet and how you do it. Kinesthetic people, I'm going to give you clarinets and you're going to practice playing with them and then we'll see what happens. Then, 3 months later, after we've done all of this teaching, this is an extreme, ludicrous example, but after all this teaching, I say, okay, everybody, here's your clarinets, it's time to play. This group would do the best, not because they're kinesthetic learners, because they've practiced in a way that's consistent with the recall. They've practiced playing the clarinet, now I've asked them to play it. If I ask you all what's an image of a clarinet, which of these are clarinets, and I showed you many different types of clarinets, from a bass clarinet to a little alto clarinet, actually the visual group may do the best because they've looked at hundreds and hundreds of pictures of clarinets, and so you actually might score the best if I say which of these are actual clarinets. The auditory clarinet, the auditory group may do best if I say final exam time. Where did the clarinet come from? And what aspects of an embouchure are important and all these things. You may have memorized all those things, so you actually do better on that than either of these two groups. So it really depends on the exam as to who would do better. So the overall response here, best thing you can possibly do, and this is why this is the interesting component, teach if you've always believed that learning styles was important, which I did for years, so I would make sure there was visual components, auditory components, kinesthetic components. If you're doing that, you teach exactly the same. Because multiple modes is the best thing to get retrieval. So multiple modes is great. What you try to remove a little bit of is remove that concept where students say, I can't learn from you, or I can't learn from her, because I'm a visual learner, and she actually tells a lot of stories, and she has us do different things with our hands, but we don't do good visual stuff, so there's no way for me to learn. That's not true. But a student believes it's true, they won't learn, not because of a teaching strategy, but because they've shut down. And once you shut down, you're done. So you have to be careful. By the way, this is also illustrated well in an article from one of the best sources of information, The Onion. Now don't laugh, because it says right under the word The Onion, America's finest news source. This is parents of nasal learners demand an odor-based curriculum. This little girl, this is all washed out here, so a nasal learner struggling with an odorless textbook. How could she possibly read a book if she's a nasal learner and the book has no odors to it? She can't possibly learn. So this is things, yes. At the bottom though, and I got cut off here. Let me see if I can just get it better this way. I can probably just, whoops. Well, I'm not going to be able to read it because I don't have eyes like that anymore. Basically, the quote, I've done this so many times, basically says, oh, here it is. My 15-year-old daughter, Chloe, used to goof off with her friends and get into trouble all the time. Now I realize all those D's and F's did not represent any failure on my daughter's part, but rather the school's failure to provide an appropriate nasal-based curriculum. My kid goofs around, gets into trouble, she's a nasal learner, you don't teach with smells, that's why. So we have to be careful to take that argument away. And by the way, before I move on, I'll answer this question, but this was done in jest. Actually, olfactory recall is one of the strongest aspects for recall that's out there. You can take a whiff of something you haven't smelled in years, and bam, you will be right back there. So there's all kinds of studies out there in the psych world. Peel an orange while you're studying, then peel an orange while you're taking the test. State-dependent learning, it doesn't have to be smells, by the way. Take a test. Oh, remember some of these great ones? Underwater. Remember the study where they had people in scuba gear studying, and then they took the test either in scuba gear or out of the water? People smoking pot, studying smoking pot, and then taking the test smoking pot. It turns out, by the way, it is not beneficial to smoke pot during the test or during study. I won't tell you any of the final studies, but that one overall was the overall finding. So yes.
Well, it's actually not a question, it's something that was said to me in my class by a freshman. When I asked her why she didn't turn in her summer reading paper, she said, because I can't read books that I'm not interested in.
Oh, good one.
And my response was, I think that that would sincerely handicap you in your college career.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know where this is going to go, but but that's the kind of sometimes that the freshmen will. Another one told me he can't read books, he can only listen to them.
Yes.
And I said, well, that's great, but I can guarantee you that not every textbook or everything you need here at college is going to be available in that mode. You are going to have to learn, if you want to be here and be successful, you have to learn how to do this.
So I've talked a lot already. I got some really quick responses I could do, but I'm curious from you. So what do you tell someone? I want to go to the first one first. I love this one. In fact, I got a little chapter in this little book that you're going to borrow. Don't buy it. Just go to Chris's office. He'll check it out to you, and you won't have to. I'm not good at selling anything. But there's actually a little chapter in here called Paying Attention, written to students. Pay attention. So what do you tell a student on that first one? I can't really read a book I'm not interested in. How do you, and I'm not talking, nothing snippy here.
No.
How do you change the student so that you actually can move that concept forward? Anybody got an idea? And the students can weigh in too. What happens if a person says, I can't read something if I'm not interested?
Well, I can't read
Probably
book
made
I'm
that
not
statement.
What do you do? What do you do with those folks?
Ask them what they are interested in.
Okay, you can start that conversation. What
Yep.
types of things are you interested in? Because, and what I like about this, people have, and I mean people, not students, people have a terrible time generalizing things. And so a person could actually say, I'm just going to go out on a limb here because I remember from earlier, a person could say, I love baking. I think baking is the most amazing thing ever. And here I am in a gardening class. I wanted the baking class, couldn't get it. Now I'm stuck in gardening. I have no interest in gardening whatsoever. Now, one thing you could actually say is, talk to me a little bit more about what is it that you love about baking? Why don't you like gardening? And my guess is that if you really try some critical thinking, you could say, and I'm not sure, we could spend some time on this, but I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. My guess is that you could make a really strong argument that the two areas are not that different. I think we could mostly argue that those are very similar. There's a different outcome, but I would even venture to say they're more similar than something. This isn't a game where I just say, well, we mentioned photography. Well, it's the same as photography too. Now I see photography as different, but I can see gardening and baking as very similar for ingredients, for combinations.
Taking the time to make something.
Yes, taking the time, because it isn't something you can just have it like that. For a souffle, you're going to wait, you plant something. So basically what you're saying is, maybe it's more similar than you thought. So that's
Well, I
one.
offered an alternative assignment to the student because we had the speaker of the book come to
Okay.
campus. So I said, okay, here's the link, go back, view that
Yeah.
speaker's talk, and give me your take on, this question.
Yeah.
She didn't turn that in. That's
Gotcha.
true, sorry.
And sometimes people just aren't interested. But the one concept is to kind of draw back and say, here's the ways that are, talk about it first and say, here's some ways that might be the same. So why don't you read it then? Others, just really quick, we'll do one more and then we got to, timing. Any other way that you can help someone who's just not interested? Okay, I'll give you one of mine then. I like to start the conversation of why you're at college. Why are you here?
Why are you here?
And that's one you probably had, but why are you here? And I'll tell you what, I really have a great conversation now. I like to talk to student groups now, it's kind of cool. Here's one of the things I love to talk about is I really didn't care a whole lot for humanities type courses when I was an undergraduate, because I was going to be a criminal justice, I was going to be a cop, I was going to be a state trooper. So what I paid attention to when I started school was everything that would help me to be a state trooper in Michigan. At 18, state trooper in Michigan. Oh, the microphone's here, I gotta be careful. I'm trying to separate the room because I do that when I teach. I've been trying not to move too much because we needed that mic, but I like separating the room a bit. I'm gonna be a state trooper, I'm 18 years old. Fast forward about 30 years later, I'm an industrial psychologist in the Department of Family Medicine as an associate professor teaching doctors how to do rounds and teach clinical bedside skills. I don't even know how you get further away than that and stay in academia. I never left academia. I stayed in the university. If you leave the university, I could go a whole nother realm away. So the fact is, and I like to have the conversation, I don't want to sound rude, but I don't know if you know what you're interested in yet. Think about that for a little bit. And this person says, well, I know what I'm interested in. And say, do you? You know what you know, and of the things you know which of those interest you, but how do you know that the thing on the other side of that door is interesting or not? And this is my favorite one. Until you open that door, you don't even know if it's interesting. So I'm sorry, when you read the first 3 pages of the book and say it doesn't interest me, you don't know what the next page is. Read the entire book, write the report, and tell me how stupid the book was. That's totally okay. But you read the book and tell me why you didn't find it interesting, not why you're not going to find it interesting. Because now you got me on the soapbox there. I can tell you right now, if I had a diagnostic test, the people who say, this is boring, I don't like it, I don't want to learn it, boy, you look down the path, and I'd like to see where they end up 20 years later, versus the person that says, I don't think I'm going to like this, but I guess I won't know until I try it. So it's a huge, huge difference that you get into. So there's. That sounded preachy even to me. All right, now, given the fact that we have about 3 or 4 minutes left, a couple other things that I find huge. This was Carol Dweck's study. I really like this. These are anagrams. Take these words, mix them up, come up with brand new words. So you got like mug becomes. Look at you guys you're all so good. I worked 7 years in Oregon. It's important for me, the self-esteem part. Now, after you do a whole bunch of these, then we tell you, good in 3 different groups. Tell you individually, but you're in one of 3 conditions here. Good for you, you did really well. Good for you, you did really well. You must have worked so hard on that. And good for you, you did really well. You're really smart. That's it. Everything else is identical. The only thing we've said is good for you, you worked hard, and you're smart. That's all. Then we have you come back and do another list. A long list, but there are more words like this. Actually, some of them aren't too bad. Marching becomes. Oh, there you go. See? Ooh, nameless. How about nameless? All right, well, we don't want you to get hurt, so here you go. Basically, we come back on this one and we say, ouch, ouch, and ouch. What we're really after here is for you to do something. So this is really important here. What we wanted you to do poorly, it's something you originally did very well. You solved these anagrams, you were really good, but now there's evidence that you're not. Now, what happens after you face adversity? Once you fail at something, and I'll tell you, I believe this is one of the biggest things in all of teaching and learning, is what do you do when you fail? So we have you come back and do another list. So you do this list really, really fast, and then we graph it. If I had more time, this is one of my favorite things to do, I would have a little sheet printed out, and I would have you draw, where do you think, trial 2 we don't want, because this is number of problems solved, and there's a big long list, so you just, generally, where do you think people went from trial 1 to trial 3 across the 3 groups? And so I'll do this, I asked you before, how do you know if your students are getting it? I'll do this in my statistics or my research methods class. If a person happens to draw like a bar graph here that says people told smart, people told nothing, and then people told that they worked hard, something like that, then I know they don't understand how this information is going to be graphed. They don't even understand the graphing part. If they draw it and they start with the left-hand side, like, here's what happened with the first group that just said, good for you, you did well. If they start with 3 different spots over trial 1, I'll realize that they don't understand randomization, because the 3 spots would have to be really close if you start with 3 randomized groups. So I can get a lot of information. The students, after they draw it, I would say compare your graph to your neighbor, or what you've drawn. And I'll tell you over and over again, if they draw it and compare it to their neighbor, what they find out is their neighbor drew something different. And then they have to talk about why they're different. And then if you try to move on without showing them the answer, they'll get mad at you. Whoa, I've had students at the end of class period, when I said, I'm so sorry we ran out of time, I'll have to show you the results next class. So, no, quickly, do it now. How many times will students sit in the class and say, we're not leaving until we get the answer? So this is a really powerful thing to do in any of your fields. If you can set up a problem and have them work at it and then compare, really important step. Get into a small group, 4 or 5 is really best, not one other person, 4 or 5 and compare. And I almost forgot to say that. The reason I would do 4 or 5, if you do one other person and they happen to look over and either they both happen to draw it the same, then they will have this really big belief that everybody must be the same, because we were the same. Or if I didn't really do it, understand it, and you didn't really understand it, I look at you and say, well, I didn't really get it, and you say, me neither, we're done. If it's a group of 5 people, though, and 2 really understood it, they'll start explaining it to the other 3. By the way, the end result, people who are told good for you tend to come back from adversity and do about the same. People who are told good for you, you must have worked really hard, come back and do significantly better. People in this one study that were told, good for you, you must be really smart, do significantly worse. This has been replicated and it's been pushed into other areas. For sake of time, I'm just going to tell you the reasoning behind this by Dweck and all of her colleagues. If you're told, good for you, you must be smart, you set up a fixed mindset. You're smart. You know this stuff. And then if you fail at it, your response is, I guess I don't. Once I guess I don't, then it can go into that category of, I guess I can't do that. Math, almost everybody does okay at math. When you look at the studies, it's phenomenal. 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, people are not heavily differentiated on their math, where they score on math. Very, very similar in the first 3 grades. And then all of a sudden you start to see these huge bifurcations. And later you get to people who don't do well at all. Part of that, and my daughter is a perfect test case, when she was little, and I knew this stuff for a long time, when she was little, used to go for parent-teacher conferences, and the teachers would say, math teacher one time, your daughter is so smart. I said, she works really hard. Whew, she is so smart, and yet she works so hard. I want to talk about effort. She works hard, not that she's smart, because I know there's problem brewing. And the teacher actually at one point even said, well, she wouldn't have to work as hard as the rest because she is so smart. No, she does all of her homework. She works really, really hard. A couple of years later, I came home one day and my daughter's crying and she's kind of sitting at the table and I said, what's the matter? And she said, well, I always thought I was good at math. Turns out I'm not. Turns out I'm not. What happened was she ran into some stuff she struggled with, and because she'd always been told, you're so smart, you're so smart, you're so smart, she never had to work at it. Your students will show up at college having been told they're so smart, you're so smart, look at where you're going to college, it's a fabulous place. You're gonna do so well there because you are so smart. Then they come into your class, they get an F minus, and the first thing I thought was, I was high school smart, I'm not college smart. I put myself right into that category because of the smartness all over. So what you do if you got young children, talk about energy and work, not smartness. I love to do this with students now too. Someone turns in really, really something fabulous. Instead of saying just simply, wow, that's great, try this out. Say, this is some really good work. You've obviously put some energy into this. Now if I say you put some energy into it, suppose it's our friend here who's written something. What's your name?
Nick.
Nick. So Nick has written something and hands it to me and I say, Nick, this is fabulous. If I say this is fabulous and he says, yeah, it's kind of what I do. You don't strike me as that kind of guy. But if you just said thank you, whatever, what I'm doing is reinforcing the smart component. But if I instead say, Nick, this is fabulous, I'm just curious, when did you put some work into this? And if he says, no, I just knocked it off last night, it took a couple hours. Say, well, that was last night. When did you really do the work? And if I said, when did you really do the work, you know what I'm going for, right? He gets it real quickly. It's, you've worked at this for years. And then you're seeing the fact that, yeah, okay, well, I used to do this. I've had students who've actually said, oh, I did that writing kinds of things. Oh, I knocked that off real quickly. Say, yeah, but you're good at it. You must have put some time in. When did you put the time in? Well, no, I've always been good at writing. So talk to me about always been good at writing. Well, I was on the school newspaper in high school, and I was on the, I did a study abroad, and I focused on writing, and all these things they've done. I said, so you've been working at writing for years. Well, no wonder you wrote like this. But that's a very different mentality from a student even saying, I did it, it only took a couple hours. Nothing takes a couple hours together. So focusing on the effort part is huge. And if you've got small children, focusing on effort, not, ooh, look at you, you're a genius drawer. Okay, that was the answer. And by the way, when people do come up with this kind of fixed mindset, the fact that you either have it or you don't, if I offer you a suggestion on how to fix something, we'll pick writing because I just did. The writing is good here, but in the middle it wanders a little bit and it doesn't have a really good conclusion that draws me in. If you have a fixed mindset, you don't take that as helpful criticism. You take that as, no, yes, I'm a writer, so thank you very much, but I know what I'm doing. A growth mindset, where you constantly think, I can be better all the time. That goes all the way back to that first thing that we did at the beginning with the icebreaker. How do you get better and better at baking? If you've been baking for 20 years, a couple of you have. If you've been baking or taking photographs for the last 10 years, how do you get better next week? You go out and you find something you're not doing well and you do better at that. By the way, I love it. These are all kind of messages I like to get across to students. Another little game we play is, when's the last time you messed something up? When's the last time you failed at something? When's the last time you didn't do something well? And I actually asked a colleague this, and she said, never. I don't do things poorly. If I say I'm going to do them, I'm going to do them well. I said, so you haven't done anything poorly in the last 5 years? She says, no. I said, it's so sad. Because what she's done is picked things only that she could do and did those. She has been growing a bit, which is nice. I don't want people to say, oh, I fail every day. Everything I do is a mess. That's not what we're going for. But you know, I took on this mural that I was going to do, and in the end it was okay. It was okay, but it wasn't fabulous. So what would have made it fabulous? Well, I guess I need to leave myself more time. Whatever the what would have is the growth part. So the growth becomes incremental, not a criticism. Now I'm going to end with this. I got to talk just briefly about multitasking. This is just off the web. It's like a viral, it's all gone viral now. The dear students, I know when you're texting classes. We used to call, back in the old days, before iPhones, we used to call this the BlackBerry prayer. This is so cool because the BlackBerry prayer would look a little like this. This is well worth grabbing a chair for. So I'm in a meeting. People used to do this all the time. And the BlackBerry prayer used to look like this. So yeah, it just looked like you're praying. So it's kind of cool stuff. Chronic multitaskers were terrible at ignoring irrelevant information, terrible at keeping information in their heads nicely and neatly organized, and terrible at switching from one task to another, and yet they think they're great multitaskers. This was one of the best findings I've read recently, because basically what they're finding, you rarely get to see this in human behavior. This is great. Individuals who are engaged in a task across time where they believe they're getting better at the task, when in fact they're getting worse at the very task that they continue to do. The only one that's close to this one is cramming for exams. Cramming for exams is another really insidious thing, because and I'll come right back to this one, if you've got 5 days before a test and you have 10 hours that you can allocate to studying, you can either study, I'm only giving you two choices. This side of the room, you study 2 hours a night for 5 nights. This side of the room, you study 10 hours the night before the test. In the end, you know who scores better on the exam, right? Yep, the cramming group. The cramming group will score better on the exam. That's the crazy thing. See, even you pointed to the side of the room. A lot of people say, no, you know, we're supposed to have the space study. Now, listen up, folks, because I would want you leaving with Dr. Z saying you should cram for tests. No. You do better on that exam that happens the next morning. You know what's really, really cool? Everybody says, yeah, I learned it, look what I did, and everything else. Then, a week later, you come back and test them again, and their scores are in the toilet. The cramming group's in the toilet. The distributed people's scores, you lose globally different numbers all over the place. Big numbers I've seen, about 30% of the material you studied a week later is going to be gone. About 80% gone a week later. So cramming actually helps you short term and hurts you long term. By the way, for any of you, big tip. Anybody who says, I have 4 exams and people don't talk like this, but I'm going to do it. I have 4 exams and a comprehensive final. If you have a B average after these exams going into the final, you don't have to take the final. You just take an average of these scores. You've just doubly reinforced the idea of cramming for each one of your unit tests and increasing that concept that they will know nothing down the road. If you score B's on all of these, it does not mean that you're likely to score a B here. My calc grades, by the way, from that first calc, I have to make these up because I don't remember them, but I remember the ballpark numbers. I get 80%, 83%, 81%, 78%, 30%. You know what I learned on the comprehensive final? You can't learn a semester's worth of calculus the night before the test. You know what else I learned? I can learn 2 weeks of calculus the night before a test. So the idea here is it was all gone, it's just gone. So that's another pervasive finding. But this one's good. The more people multitask, the worse they're getting at it because it's not really multitasking. I need an image up here. That's what I need. I need a Gestalt image of figuring ground. That would be perfect. The concept here is you can't cognitively attend to two things exactly at the same time if they both demand attention. So here's the broken down version in a couple seconds in a way I haven't heard people talk about this. When you start to do a task, it's called a controlled process. You have to work at it. After you work at it over and over and over and over again, the neurons do a cool thing. Your brains are wired in a cool way. This is one thing you can impact in your classroom. The more frequently a neuronal path fires, the more easily it fires. It makes total sense. As we live our lives thousands of years ago, the things we do a lot should be easier and easier to do because they help us to survive. So, as you do something over and over again, your brain says, that's important enough. We're going to make that pathway an important one. The other pathways across time get pruned out. If you don't do something for years, you can claim it's important. Your physiological structure says if you haven't used this for 5 years, it's not important to you. Those pathways die away. So, controlled process becomes automatic. As a process becomes automatic, it takes less resources, which means you can do two automatic things at the same time. The people who say you can't multitask, they're wrong. I am multitasking right at this second. Look at me. I walk and talk at the same time. I am multitasking. If you say, yeah, everybody can do that, find who's got like a 2-year-old? Any 2-year-olds, little babies? Okay, this is good. So the reason that psychologists like that, what area are you in? What's your discipline?
Leadership.
Leadership? Okay. So I'll tell you why psychologists like to have children. No IRB committee. Okay, that sounds funky, but okay. So here's what happens. As your child starts to walk, and you say, if it's a boy, we'll just say, oh, good boy, or a good girl, look at you. What happens as they start to walk and you say, good girl, what's the next thing that happens? They fall down. Because what they're trying to do is multitask. They're trying to walk, they listen to you, and now they're trying to listen and walk at the same time, and those are two very controlled tasks, so they fall down. Later, they say, whatever, and walk. Look at you, you're such a good girl. Yeah, I'm leaving. They can walk and throw their hand up, and they can triple task. The point is, you can do it later. However, even when you get into an automatic process, well, I shouldn't say even when you get to automatic, some things remain controlled forever. Me texting my friend is still a controlled process because I have to engage the thinking process and devote some energy to what I'm typing. I can note sample back and forth. So if you're teaching, I can listen to you and I can text. I can listen and text. And if I sample quickly, so many cool things out there. Do you know you have a blind spot, 2 of them? 2 blind spots because of the way the optic nerve works. Out there, there's 2 big holes and you can't see. Do you know why you don't know that you have blind spots? It's because as you're looking around, your eyes are sampling all the time and they're grabbing all of the stuff that's around and filling those spaces in so you don't even know that they're there. Plus your eyes cover for each other. If I text and listen and text and listen, it's just like the blind spot. I can fill enough of that in that I think I know what's going on. But if you close one eye, and you're driving a car, and a car enters that blind spot over there, and you pull out in front of it, you die because you didn't see it coming, because the sampling didn't work. In the classroom, if I'm texting while you're teaching, and all of a sudden you say, this piece of information is absolutely critical, and you tell me what that information is, and you say, okay, don't forget that, and you'll be good. Now let's move on to the next thing. I've been sampling back and forth. I just missed 15 seconds. And now when the test comes, I bombed the test because I didn't hear you say, if you don't understand this formula, you are sunk. But I was sampling. So the thing is, you can task shift, but the studies are showing as you do that, you're actually dividing your attention, because the last thing I'll say here is that as your brain starts doing this, we lose focus of what we're attending to. This is why people do die when they're texting. Is that old studies with dual headphones. You could be texting and forget the fact that you're actually driving at the same time. So you're texting and driving and texting and driving. And they've done studies on this too with simulators. And a person will say, oh, no, you don't. It's not going to work out like this. And then they look up and you can take a snapshot of their face and you can look up and you can see that they suddenly realize how long it's been since they flipped back over. By the way, a quick study was affiliated with this one. Gave people internet access to the computer and a television with a remote. and said, here's what I want you to do. Just play with both of these as much as you want and flip back and forth to whatever extent you want. They did this. I don't have the study up here. At the end, they said to them 30 minutes later, how many times do you think you flipped back and forth? The estimate from the individuals was about 18 times on average. 18 times I switched from one to the other. The number actually, when they actually did this with the videos, 150-ish. When they reported 18, they didn't realize that they were going back and forth. In fact, the average span they spent on the television was 2 seconds and the computer was 6 seconds before they flipped their eyes back and forth. So the concept here is multitasking is possible. It's done all the time. It can be very insidious. So that's the side.